Um, Still to be determined whether or not it's going to be put on the YouTube site, but for now, assume the session is being recorded and behave accordingly. All mics muted. Large numbers of people mean, barking dogs and flushing toilets and whatnot, which can be distracting. For questions and comments, we'll save them till the end. People are welcome to put a question or a comment in the chat at any time they wish. And when we get to an appropriate time, probably at the end, we'll go through all of them. And that way you don't have to, if it's in the chat, you don't have to worry about forgetting it and having to remember it. The other thing about it is I'll be moderating the chat at the end, and we'll let people raise virtual hands and so on. Please be patient. We're all volunteers. There. As demonstrated by my lack of ability with PowerPoint. So the RA Canoe Camping Club is part of the RA Center. The RA Center is a great big sprawling area on the Riverside Drive in Ottawa between Bronson Avenue and Bank Street. To give you an idea of the size, that little building there is where we keep all our canoeing stuff. The other thing they have is a couple of open pools, and for people looking for swimming lessons, the RA has lots of them, and so that's a scarce commodity in this world today. RA has all kinds of different things going on, not just sports. It's got meeting halls and social events and so on and so forth. Okay, the mission, as you would expect, is health and exercise related. Give you an idea of the different types of sports and activities that are available. Some very physical things such as judo, the fitness center. Badminton, they send people to the international competitions. Ski club, the archery club. Curling has been revamped, so it's now got a surface and a facility that was used for national competitions. Largest pickleball in the city, largest soccer league in the city, and. Getting to the canoe club. We started in 1952, and Dot, although not quite with feet on the world at that point, was part of the club back then. We were under the Y until 2012, moved over to the RA Center. The thing that's important to remember about us is we're all volunteers. So if you see a trip on a calendar, it's because some volunteer said, you know what, I'd love to head off to such and such a place, put it on the calendar, and people who are interested can then join them. The middle photograph there, by the way, was from a presenter from a couple of presentations ago. What he would do is he'd take his kids camping with some flatbread, some tomato sauce, and some ingredients. The kids would have to assemble a pizza using the flatbread. He'd grab a whole bunch of rocks and he'd build a pizza oven in the backwoods. Let's go the other way. So we have day trips, weekend trips, longer trips, flat water, whitewater, family, training. Training is anywhere from, I've never been in the canoe in my life, all the way up to advanced solo whitewater. The club has canoes and group equipment available for people to use, but it's for club members going on club trips. So don't sign up thinking you're going to use this as a cheap outfitter. Now, the great thing about the club is it's all about affordable recreational canoeing. And so depending on the boat you're taking, it's anywhere from $15 to $25 a day. And then other than the boats, the group equipment is no charge. So for example, first aid kits, that's a key safety thing. We're not going to charge people for first aid kits because we want them to go along. We've got bailers, stoves, all that sort of thing. Again, the middle picture is a lot of fun, but it is not a recommended technique, especially if you're in a lightweight canoe. So for our presentation, we were going to have Lee Benson, but apparently she can't make it and has been replaced by this woman named Fa. Uh, she is a paddler, contractor, research editor, and ghostwriter. Goes by the ghost name of Fa. Dot, longtime distance paddler, longtime paddler. As I mentioned, she's been in the club since the 50s, in part because her dad founded the club, and yeah, from the time she was able to put her feet on the ground, she was as likely to put them in a canoe. So with that, I will turn it over to Dot and Fa.
Okay, thank you. So my good friend, you need to put your PowerPoint presentation up. Can you do that?
I am trying, Madame Bonenfant.
Here we go.
Try. Yes, I believe
Excellent.
we're almost getting there.
Yep. Oh, you're getting to be a pro at
I'm
this.
sorry. So sorry.
No, it's perfect.
Patience, everyone. Oh dear. We need to go back, and my machine is not working. Let me just try this again.
Technology does this to us every time. Okay.
And there we have it, I believe.
Yes. Okay, welcome everybody, and we'll go to the next slide. So this evening, we're going to take you on a bit of a time travel back generally to an era in Canadian history. And with thanks to a special guest who you've just barely met, and who will take an overview of the influencers and upbringing and when the adventure begins in married life and moving to Lower and Upper Canada at that time. And time travel will take you back in some detail, and using some painting details to tell you a story of the fur trade and lumber industries and how Canada came to be. So here we go. Let's begin. We'll go to the next slide. So our time travel starts. Here you go. This is a picture of London around 1865. So as you can imagine, if you live there, you're not going to have cell phones or TV or radios or cameras, and no social marketing, no social media, etc. And you live here in a very dense city, and there's no trees in sight, at least not here. If you're lower class, you work and work and work and work some more. If you're in middle class woman, you're confined to domesticity, to house and children, and you have no escape and no adventure really. So what's the main entertainment? It's live. So singers, minstrels, plays, theater, reading, and art. Importantly, art galleries have been open to all classes since 1824. And there are summer exhibitions at the Royal Academy of Art. And this is the place where all artists aspire to be and hope that they can exhibit some of their work. So we go to the next slide. There we go. This is shooting the rapids, in particular the Lachine Rapids in Montreal. So if you've lived in London in the 1860s, in this time frame, and you go to 1869, you see this wonderful adventure. And I think the perspective is standing on the shoreline, maybe on one of those rocks, and watching this huge canoe hurtle towards you, and the water looks so real. There's speed and action, and it's thrilling for downtown Londoners, especially probably for women, I think for everybody. If you're a middle class man, you have newfound wealth. You and perhaps your wife are starved for adventure, so you can buy travel art. This is the thing at the time. The art may be a souvenir of your time as a soldier in the colonies or your own adventures there. So if you look closely behind the voyageur in the middle of the canoe, there's a European couple there. There's a woman in the midst of adventure, but you can barely see her. You just see a straw hat and part of her face. And the artist has signed this piece of work just by the initials FAH. They're on the bottom left there, and they're not easy to see. So then at another Royal Academy exhibition, you see this picture. This one is absolutely mesmerizing, I think. This is called Canoes in a Fog, Lake Superior, painted and shown actually in 1869. So if you look again, there's again a man and a woman again on an adventure. Guy's smoking his pipe, and the woman seems to be focused on something down on her lap. And then you identify the artist again, FAH, and the year 1869. And then perhaps if you're fortunate enough, this is the painting that you see. And you'd need be very lucky because this painting was never on display. It was a consignment or a commission. It was generally to the general public, it was unknown until it mysteriously showed up at the National Archives in Canada in 1921. And this one is called The Canoe Manned by Voyageurs Passing a Waterfall. Note again, there's a woman and man in the middle, and the initials FAH are down in the lower right hand corner, which you're not easy to see on this one. Anyway, we'll do some details in a little bit later. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, and the first question to show is, has anyone seen one or more of these paintings before? If you have, if you'd have your video on and wave. And wave. So some people have, yep. Okay, let's go to the next question. Do you know the artist's name? And if you do, hang on to your hat. Okay. Do you know who this is? The next question is, did you know the artist was a woman? Or did you just, well, since the name of our presentation is Frances Anne Hopkins, that's who FAH or FA is, and we'll do the last bullet point there. So the artist is Frances Anne Hopkins, and she was a rock star in London in the 1860s and 70s. Initially, she was assumed, the artist of those paintings was assumed to be a man. So we'll take a look at who was FAH. And actually, if she was alive today and with similar famosity, yeah, she would be maybe open up be the opening band for a Taylor Swift concert. That's how well she was regarded. Okay. So I want to take a moment and introduce our special guest for this evening. Sorry, Mary Ellen Weller, it's not used yet. Our special guest is Frances Anne Hopkins, otherwise known as FAH or FA. So over to you, Frances Anne.
Oh, Madame Bonenfant, thank you so much for inviting me here. I'm so sorry that I'm sorry I have to take over the body of Ms. Benson, so she doesn't get to see the presentation, but she's very generous in doing this twice in 1 year. Last July, she ended up with black flies in Kakabeka Falls while I had a very nice paddle in the Adirondacks. Thank you again. Madame Bonenfant has asked me to tell you about how I came to paint the amazing voyageur, the country now called Canada, and the spell that they had on me. Madame Bonenfant will then show you more of my paintings, of the subjects that captured my heart. And I must say, I must apologize to you before I even begin. Because I'm here for only a short time, both tonight and really as a spirit with you, I must hasten through my presentation and my past so that you see more of my paintings. Oh yes, and I do beseech you, as I present to you tonight, I am 169 years old. I believe Madame Bonenfant has done an excellent job at trying to coach me through this thing called PowerPoint. I think she called it a crash course, and she told me about screens. She did explain they were screens, but I can tell you on more than one occasion I did feel the urge to scream in learning this new technology, but so sorry. Back to my story. From the time I was a young girl, I longed for adventure and I loved painting and sketching. And it's no wonder why. You'll understand completely when I tell you about my family and those who influenced me most greatly. I don't mean to sound boastful in any way, but I come from a long line of artists and explorers with connections to royalty. All of them were highly esteemed in their time, and I think you would say they were famous now. I'll try to impart to you the most important details. Grandfather William and grandmother Ann Beachy were both artists, mainly portraitists, he on a very grand scale and she on a miniature one. And incidentally, grandfather painted both of these portraits. When grandfather was orphaned when he was very, very young, his godfather was no one less than King George III. And he was made, so grandfather, so please excuse me. So King George III was the one who founded the Academy, Royal Academy, that Madame Bonenfant has told us about. King George III made Sir William, my father, or grandfather, Sir William, he was knighted. And that was for this picture of King George and the Prince of Wales reviewing troops. My father and my uncles, many uncles, were officers with the British Navy and were explorers of the Arctic and the Pacific. They were all artists too, and I can't speak of all of them now, but I'll just focus on Papa and Uncle Richard. Now you'll note that after speaking with Madame Bonenfant, you'll note that I call them explorers, not discoverers. The excellent, resourceful people they encountered on their voyages were not lost, and they did not need to be found. Father and Uncle Richard sailed with Sir John Franklin when Sir John Franklin was a young man on his first mission to find the Northwest Passage in 1818, and that was the hoped-for but ice-filled passage that would connect the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans. And Father also sailed with Lieutenant William Perry on another such mission, And that was in 1819 and 1820. They were frozen in the ice for 10 months, if you can imagine that. Later, Father helped organize the expeditions to find the second Franklin expedition, when it was declared lost with all 129 men in 1847. He, Perry, and other famous explorers were part of the Arctic Council, who planned the search for Sir John. And at this table, from left to right, are a whole series of explorers that you might know from traveling the north of Canada. Sir George Back, Sir William Edward Perry, a number of others, but Sir Francis Beaufort, and my father, Frederick William Beechey, at the far right. When Franklin's voyage set out in 1845, this is what the ships looked like, the Erebus and the Terror, setting sail on rather a doomed voyage. Beechey Island, now in Nunavut, was where Franklin and the crew spent the whole winter of 1845 to 1846, and it was named by my father to honor his father, Sir William. England was absolutely obsessed with the mystery of the disappearance of these ships. Terrifying images appeared, and rewards were offered to recover the expedition. Father's and my uncle's journeys took them far from home for years at a time. But all my young life, I learned of these many adventures, and I would say that I were a boy and could join them. This is some of their art. This is my father's sketch from his expedition in 1825 to 1828. You'll see that ships are trapped in the ice. And this is Uncle Richard's painting, the HMS Orpheus in a Storm in 1863. Now, I do believe that Uncle Richard's painting is much better than Papa's, but remember, Papa's was a sketch while his ships were overwintering in ice. Now, Uncle Richard is very important. He influenced me strongly. He made me pay attention to details and to recreate them accurately. From the pitch at the seams of the voyageur canoes, to the types of paddles used, to the faces of those who held them. He also showed me the importance of water and the excitement it can convey. Look at the water in his painting. He exhibited frequently at the Royal Academy and may have taken my sisters and I there. He also gave my sisters and I invaluable art lessons. For me, he gave me career advice and became a lifelong mentor. So now you can see that with such esteemed relatives, no wonder my goal was to exhibit at the Royal Academy, and my dream was to be an adventurer. Reading was so important when I grew up. It was a way to escape, especially for a girl. Travel writing was popular, but England had an absolute mania for Canada. Anna Brunell Jameson influenced me and so many other women and girls. She was the wife of Upper Canada's first Attorney General, and Upper Canada is what you would call Ontario now. She traveled independently, which was absolutely unheard of for an English woman, in 1838 in the wilds of Canada. And how exciting her travels. Through her sketchbooks and her book, Winter Studies and Summer Rambles in Canada, read or written in 1838, but still widely read by people like me, she told us of the admirable independence of Indigenous women and she brought attention to the deplorable ways that the colonists treated Indigenous peoples. She also recounted her thrilling adventures, especially shooting the rapids of Sault Ste. Marie in a birch bark canoe, the first English woman to do so, not the first woman. But this is what she wrote, and this is what would have influenced me as a 15-year-old. I could see as I looked out over the edge of the canoe that the passage between the rocks was sometimes not more than 2 feet in width, and we had to turn sharp angles, a touch of wood which would send us to destruction. All this I could see through the transparent waters, but I can truly say that I had not even a momentary sensation of fear, but rather of giddy, breathless, delicious excitement. This is another of her close-up of that sketch. So she too depicted the European women with parasol in the ship, in the canoe. Other influencers were also traveling, writing artists. English sisters Susanna Moodie and Catherine Portrayal, who married officers who were granted land, wrote of their lives settling in Canada. And I will say that now I understand that that granting of land was really the stealing of land, for which I am very sorry, and all people of my generation, I hope, would be sorry for. Ms. Trail was eternally grateful for the help of Indigenous people who helped her survive her first winter. She wrote this, Roughing It in the Bush. Her sister did, and this was a bestseller in England, you would call it, for people who were going to be settling in Canada. But getting back to Catherine Trail, she wrote the first Canadian novel for children, Canadian Crusoes. Because the Indigenous people had helped her survive the first winter for her, in this story, 2 children who are lost are rescued by a Mohawk girl. And I became an artist. How was that? In 1851, when I was 15 years old, the English census revealed that women outnumbered men. Now that meant at the time that 500,000 women were called surplus and would be very unlikely to be married. This worried many parents, including my own, because I was the third of 5 daughters. And incidentally, yes, I called myself Mrs. Hopkins preferentially. Madame Bonafont tells me that now women often keep their birth surname, like Ms. Benson and Madame Bonafont. Such independence. Then I was proud to be called, not to be called a spinster, which now I hear is an abominable word. And again, I was a chattel of my husband. I had to take his name. But now, women are no longer chattels of their husbands. Again, independence. Bravo! In 1851, a landscape artist who exhibited at the Royal Academy and who was a woman campaigned for women's rights, especially property rights. And that was Barbara Lee Smith Bodkin. Now, a modern researcher whom Madame Bonenfant and I both admire, who is with us tonight, Mary Ellen Weller Smith. She said, in a culture used to defining women only by their relationship to men, as wives, mothers, and marriageable daughters, women outnumbering men raised alarms. There were not enough husbands available. But as a result, Father set up a trust fund for me and for my sisters. This was a trust fund that would support me if I were unmarried, and that no future could take away from me should I ever marry. Father provided security and independence for us. Now, like many women, who were now allowed to think about careers because they would not have a husband to support them. I was lucky. I was thrilled to train as an artist between the ages of 15 in 1851 and the age of 22 in 1858. And then I became fall. When I was 19, in 1855, my older sister, Catherine, married Thomas Hopkins after a 5-year engagement. So I began to learn and know the Hopkins family. Tragically, the wife of Thomas's older brother, Edward William, had tragically died of cholera in Upper Canada. Edward brought his children to England to give them to the newlyweds, who took them in to keep them together. Shortly after the wedding, Edward left again for Upper Canada, but my sister lived close to me, so I visited her and the boys very often, and they grew to know me. 16 months later, in 1857, 2 months after dear Papa died, Edward returned to take the boys back to Upper Canada. While he visited, we walked and we talked. We talked about the boys, but he also told me true stories of real adventure. So after just a month of courtship, Edward proposed, and I excitedly accepted. Now, Maman frowned upon the wedding. Edward was 16 years my senior, Papa had just died, and I would need to leave immediately for Lower Canada, Quebec. We were a middle-class family with royal connections. Mama wanted to disagree, but she could not quibble about Edward's job. He was the personal secretary and assistant to Sir George Simpson, the Governor-General of the Hudson Bay Company, who was headquartered in Lachine, Quebec, just southwest of Montreal. For me, I longed for adventures. I'd been told about and had read about them. I was marrying adventure, the opportunity to paint adventure, and I would stay with the children I'd grown to love. I was thrilled. In concession, Mama allowed the marriage, but she told me how awful it had been for her to live without Papa as he traveled the world. She did not want to lose me, too. He had presented his sketchbook to her upon his return from a Pacific voyage, and she treasured it in case he did not return. As a wedding gift, she gave me a sketchbook to fill with my life across the ocean. In 1858, at age 22, I arrived with my husband and 3 stepchildren in Montreal, a bustling city now already 200 years old. We travel west to Lachine, 10 miles away. Our house is across the canal from the long-established Hudson's Bay Company warehouse, built in 1803, and something that you too can visit still today. My sketchbook filled rapidly. My house and garden, Ile d'Orval to our west. And some of the sketches in this book and others became the paintings years later, the ones that Dot Bonifant will show you. Caughnawaga, across the river, was a Mohawk and is a Mohawk community from which the HBC elite paddlers came. A winter scene on the St. Lawrence. In 1860, Sir George Simpson died, and Edward took charge of the Montreal offices of the HBC, and so we left Lachine for Montreal, where he became the chief factor. I didn't manage to sketch my husband very often, but there he is on a veranda. When we moved to Montreal, my sketches and watercolors continued. A gateway, our front lawn, Saint-Dominique Street, Ile d'Orval again, and this is one of my favorites. You'll note that Edward is reclined and rather lazy, but I, my sister, and another woman friend are very independently rowing that boat. Madame Bonenfant and I owe special thanks to our favorite scholar here with us tonight, Mary Ellen Weller-Smith, and this is her most excellent book. She too invoked my spirit, and I visited with her. Given my peculiar circumstance, I am able to say with authority that one will be found by spirits when one's life resonates with them. We, all four of us, Madame Bonenfant, Ms. Benson, Madame Weller-Smith, and I, Paul, all sat at the knees of adventurers, longing to become one. One of the things that I found, and my husband agreed, was that I was never happier than when adventuring. Even my husband noticed. And now I give you an artist, an adventurer, the one that I wished I could have become. She so kindly says that I inspired her. But I'm able to tell you with good authority that again, when one will be found by spirits when one's life resonates with them. May I now present to you Madame Bonenfant, an artist extraordinaire. She makes these wonderful paddles. She's an Arctic adventurer, a whitewater paddler, again an artist and traveler, and Paddle Canada's, one of Paddle Canada's 50 people most influential in canoeing over 50 years of its existence. May I now present to you Madame Bonenfant.
Oh, thank you very much, Miss Hopkins. I greatly appreciate that, but I'm sure there are many more people who should fit in that top 50 before me. In any case, we need to switch the sharing. So I'm going to, I hope, get my PowerPoint presentation. And are you seeing it yet?
We are.
Okay, so I'm going to do a slideshow. See, it's not, you don't have to be from a different era to get flummoxed with a, yeah, with the technology.
Thank you so much for trying to train me, Madame Bonenfant.
Well, it's like the blind leading. Anyway, thank you so much. Mary Ellen, I'm going to ask you every now and then if you can fill in some details, because I'm not sure I've got them all right, but you wrote a book about all this. So you can correct me if I'm wrong. Just unmute anytime.
Nothing like being put on the spot.
There we go. And Frances Anne, you might correct me as well. So everyone, welcome again. I'm going to pick up where wonderful Frances Anne left off, but a little bit more from the very beginning. Remember that picture of London in the 1850s? And it was sprawling and many, many, many people, lots of gray, lots of smokes from the chimneys at the time, et cetera, et cetera. So a crowded, challenging, hustling, bustling environment. And Frances Anne comes across the ocean on a steamship. So she's crossing over in about, Marianne, I'm going to guess about 8 or 9 days instead of weeks by sailboat. She's nodding. Okay, so Frances Anne arrives in Montreal and then goes to her new house, which is on the shores of the St. Lawrence. And she's arrived coming down the St. Lawrence in the middle of the high colors of autumn. So absolutely a glorious time of the year to arrive and to have this expanse, this vista out in front of her every day. I'm thinking, what a glorious thing. She loved the St. Lawrence River, no wonder. And she even named her first son after this river. His name was St. Lawrence Beachy Hopkins. So I have to remember to switch the slides too. Okay, so we are canoeists here in this group of people gathering. And Frances Anne really wanted to have some adventures of her own. And just coming across the ocean and ending up in Lachine and with the people surrounding her and the voyageur culture, etc., that was pretty exciting. And I'm going to say from 1858, when she arrived, to around 1863, she was a bit busy. So she had several babies, but also had time to go by by steamboat from Montreal down to Niagara Falls, and she did paint the falls. And then from Montreal up to Trois-Rivières and up to Quebec City. Now at Trois-Rivières, that would be still the place where there'd be a huge canoe factory for the Hudson Bay Company, and they were still producing the canoe de maître and the North canoes and another canoe that's sort of in the middle there. It's called a bâtard. So they were busy. She was busy looking after kids. Let me see if I've got stuff in the way that just hides. Yeah, making sure I don't miss anything. There you go. So that's the first few years of her life. Oh, now I've got to. And another baby in 1863. So somewhere in the 1860s, in 1860, Prince of Wales visited Canada. And one of the places he stopped, of course, was Montreal. And they had this huge regatta and special demonstration of canoeing by some of the elite paddlers from, and again, they would be from Ganawage, from the Mohawk community that you can see across the river. And here, they're all lined up, ready to do their demonstration. They're just waiting for the prince arrived. In the meantime, over on the left, you can see a group of 3 women who are there to come and see the spectacle. So one is Frances Anne, one is her sister, and one is another woman from Montreal. And they were the 3 women who attended that particular event, and all the rest were men. There's another picture that Frances Anne painted. And actually, this one of the regatta itself, the Prince of Wales liked it so much, he asked to have it, and it was hanging in his house in London. Okay, and there's a photo of that event too. That would have been the parade square, downtown Montreal. Okay, now on the top left there is Sir George Simpson, who was the chief what do you call him? He's the general or the manager. He's the grand poobah in the Hudson Bay Company.
The
What is it
governor.
going to get, Mary Ellen?
Here is the governor, Madame Bonnefoy.
Governor, thank you. Okay, so, but in 1860, and I've got, yeah, 1860, it says 1869, should be 1860. George died. And so Edward becomes the chief factor, not the governor, becomes the chief factor of the Montreal division. And because it's in Montreal, they moved to the terrace, Prince of Wales Terrace on Sherbrooke Street in Montreal. And their home was, there's a little bit more swish than their first home. It doesn't exist anymore. The building that's replaced it is part of the McGill University. So 1864, oh dear, in January, their youngest son dies. And this is a very tough thing to go through for any parent. In the meantime, that's one of the first things, and that there are several graves from the Hopkins family in the cemetery that's on Mount Royal in Montreal, so you can see them there. There was a trip planned to go from Montreal all the way, all the way to Fort William, over here on the west side of Lake Superior, and then back again to Montreal. Say again, Mary Ellen?
Well, the reason the route looks kind of funny, if you're a canoeist, you're not going to make that loop all around Lake Superior. But the weather was really, really bad. So they had to hug that southern shoreline and then go up the North Shore to get to Fort William.
Thank you.
The normal route was to go directly along the north.
There you go. And actually, you know what? As a canoeist, I was a bit disappointed because here in my head, I had Frances Anne walking across the street from her house to to the warehouse where the canoes would be filled up and ready to go, and she would hop in the middle of the canoe and take off and do that magnificent route all the way west. But that is not what happened. There were steamboats and there were trains. So a lot of this route was done by steamboat and train, probably more than half of it. Is that right, Mary Ellen?
Oh, that's very true.
And what a disappointment. That just burst my bubble about Frances Anne. However, she did have a chance to go in a canoe. And she had some trips around, and her painting, Canoes in a Fog, is based on her experiences this trip. So there are trains that go across from Collingwood to Toronto, and then Toronto all the way up to Montreal. Or you can take a steamship up Lake Ontario, up to Montreal, to the port. Oop. So here we go. In 1866, she was able to take a couple trips from Montreal to Temiskaming. And so she did one trip by herself, taking a steamboat from Montreal all the way up to Ottawa, and I think a little bit further to visit. And then she did one trip with her husband There's a steamboat in front of Oiseau Rock on the Ottawa down near Deep River. And there's one of our crew from the club doing a voyageur trip along the Ottawa from Swisha to Petawawa and going past Oiseau Rock. And too soon to that, just that. Whoop. Yeah. So on that, she was able to do the last part of the trip by canoe, by voyageur canoe with her husband, all the way up to Temiskaming and back. So a lot of her pictures, paintings from that time are, for example, this view of Ottawa in 1860, sorry, in that time frame. So 1866. We remember that Victoria chose Ottawa to be, the capital in 1857. The Parliament buildings were being built 59 to 65. So she would have seen them in 1866. And then Canada became a country in 1867, if that's the right word. Okay, so if you stand on the far shore near the Museum of History, that's a view, it's pretty similar. And also at the time, one of the industries that was really booming was the lumber industry. And so these immense rafts were coming down the Ottawa and then down the St. Lawrence to Montreal and Quebec City. So they were huge, and big company of people would live on them. They would have sails. They had oars to row the timber cribs. Pretty amazing. These paintings are near Ottawa. There's a photo not too long later. And this one is near Montreal. This is another using the theme of timber rafts. Yeah, and so these are on the Lac des Deux-Montagnes near Montreal. So in 1869, until I pull out my notes here. Yeah. In 1869, oh my gosh. What happens that year is amazing. After her trip in 1867, she goes back to London to live there, and then and paints and has an exposition at the Royal Academy. Big deal. Show you in a minute. And then comes back. And because this is like the final trip that she and her husband are going to take again, using the old route, and they're supposed to do by voyageur canoe. In any case, she comes back from London. The Royal Academy exhibition started on May the 3rd, so she would have been there for the opening and for a little while, and then came home. And 10 days later, her oldest sons, the boy that she called St. Lawrence, in honor of the St. Laurent River, he died from scarlet fever. So this canoe trip obviously would have been delayed considerably. Mary Ellen, could you describe this trip?
I think it became the trip of her dreams. And unfortunately, it's also the trip of a broken heart.
Yes.
There's a point at which, now in 1869, when you're talking about that, her firstborn son dies, but he's only the last to die in Canada. At that point, she married in 58. She is pregnant in 59, 60, 61, 63, and in 65. So 5 pregnancies. Of the 5, 4 of them are buried in Canada. 1 child will return with them to England.
Well, that's heartbreak.
And it is, yes. And the 3 have already died when this last boy dies in 1869. They don't seem quite to have the spirit to go on the trip. And then all of a sudden the decision is made. And I guess I would maintain that there's a certain comfort and solace and nourishment that can be found in those lakes amid all those pine trees with simply a canoe and a paddle. And I think they very deliberately sought that.
I think they were wise to do that.
Mhm.
I think you're exactly right. But again, I think part of the route was done by a steamship and train, and
Oh, yeah.
then they made it out to Fort William and
Mm.
then paddled back.
Yes, yes.
Wonderful. So a lot of her very, very dramatic pictures, and they're huge, they're large pictures, are from that particular trip.
Mhm.
Okay. Thank you. I'm so glad you're there. Okay, so then here we go. This is actually the Royal Academy of Arts, and it's in London. And in 1868, it's a huge year. So I think that year was a huge swing of emotions for
Mhm.
Frances Anne, because 1868 was the 100th anniversary of the Academy, and it was a big deal there. And 4,600 artists applied and submitted paintings. Of those, 900 were accepted. Frances Anne Hopkins submits Canoes in a Fog on Lake Superior, and it's accepted and is shown in gallery number 1, which is a bit of a prestigious place.
Mhm.
So, Mary Ellen, did people know she was a woman at that point, or that it was only FAH and they assumed it's a man?
In 1869, that's not completely clear. The article that calls the artist he appeared in the art journal, but I think it's later. I think it's 72 or 74. I could look up the exact date. In 69, the I'm searching for words that are polite. I'm sorry. What happens is not so much that they assume she's a man, it's that they kind of ignore the artist. She given very, very short, almost well, we'll be kind. The reviews are abbreviated. And they don't say much. And there's a sense of, oh, she just painted what she saw. No. A painting that is 3 feet by 5 feet is not just what you saw. It is something that has been composed and planned and very deliberately placed on canvas. There exist a number of early sketches for this and even some early watercolors. I believe they're out in Calgary at the Glenbow. And it took her a while to come up with this composition, but once she got it, she knew it was right. That diagonal going from bottom left, and then the canoes in the upper, more in the upper right, just disappear into that fog.
And fading.
Perfect.
And it's exquisite. And having paddled on Lake Superior, you
Oh,
can have mornings like that.
Oh,
Where it's the light is exquisite, so it's everything there. And there's more to it. So it's a fabulous piece of artwork, but it's also all of her paintings of the voyageurs were really great records of what was happening at that time. And that's the time when fur trade is declining and the use of canoes is fading off into the distance, sort of like this. It's an analogy there.
oh yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to do, so again, we look for, there's Frances Anne and her husband in the canoe. And I
Mhm.
want to point out the stern paddler is standing up and he's doing a particular stroke. So I'm going to challenge the paddlers out there. What stroke do you think this guy is doing? I'm going to ask you to put it in the chat box. And Mark, if you can take a look at the chat box and see what people are saying. What stroke is this guy doing? Okay, because she was pretty precise. The other things I want to point out is he has a ceinture fléchée, a special belt that was made, or a sash made for a voyageur to hold their shirt in, keep the bugs out, also to protect from hernias when they're hauling heavy loads, etc. And then let's see, what else did I? Here's a guy in the middle. He's stopping to have a drink. And this guy is, okay, here we go. This guy is standing up. So is the bow paddler in the canoes. You can see that. The last arrow over here on the left is pointing at, we've got some extra paddles shoved in the back, and having done voyageur trips, that's what you see. And then just below there is the rig for the sail. So pretty exquisitely painted.
Mhm.
And sorry, did you want to add anything, Mary Ellen?
No,
Okay.
So
So,
Dot,
yes,
the guesses in the chat are across stern pry or rudder.
there you go. I think so, but look at his hand, the grip hand, and it's in the wrong position. Or if I was doing a stern pry, my hand would be parallel with the paddle, and it's this way, it's across. So have another think. My buddy Reed said, I don't know what he's doing. But she was pretty exact in her painting, so we don't know. You know what? I'm checking the time. We are 10 after 8, and I've got about 10 more slides to do. So let's see how we do on this. Anyway, this is one of my favorite paintings. I love this one. And there's a whole bunch of other paintings that she did that can be seen, some of them at our National Gallery and other places around the country, and some we don't see. This is my very, very favorite painting. I love this one. It's the voyageurs in there paddling in front of a beautiful falaise. It's gorgeous. And so what I love about it too is there's a bit of informality of it. There's a comfort, and people are traveling. Right now they're paddling, but they're not working real hard at this. And the other thing to note is this gorgeous painting on the bow and the stern, and always on the bow, there's a circle, and there's either this one, if I get the name right. Anyway, it is a symbol meaning the north wind, and some of them have a different one, and it means, you know, it's a good luck charm kind of thing. Okay. And we'll go to the next one. So this one is, if you've ever paddled a birch bark canoe, sooner or later they leak. So you have to repair them a bit. And if you've bumped a rock or, yeah, hit the shore and you shouldn't have, that kind of thing, you got to do some patchwork. And that's usually done at night. And she would have seen that. And here's a sight at early dawn. I love this painting, again, because it really shows the life of a voyageur and the equipment that they had. Sleeping overnight with the canoes turned over and the sail draped over the canoe for shelter. The guy cooking on the fire. Trunks and baskets and that kind of thing to carry. There's a guy who's still sleeping, is a bit of a lazy bum there. He's going to have to get up soon. Okay. Here's the other one that we know a lot.
Mhm.
So this is shooting the rapids and the Lachine Rapids. And actually, my grandfather did this somewhere in the 1880s, I think.
Ooh.
It's a story in my family. And so, you know what I love about this is Frances Anne painting fairly realistically. The canoe is up high. It's obviously out for just a tourist trip. It's not the canoe is not fully loaded, so the boat is not down lower in the water. The other thing is these guys are working as a team. And there's not a look of, oh my God, on their face. So it's something that they're used to. The aval here, again, paddlers. What is he doing? Is he doing a cross draw or is he doing a cross forward? What do you think? Put your answers in the chat, see what you get. The other thing I like is that there are a lot of different peoples in this boat. There are people who are obviously First Nations. They're probably from Ganawage. And there are people who might be from the Orkney Islands, from Scotland. They might be Métis. They might be Quebecois guys from Montreal. But each one of them is an individual. You can see there's a bit of character in each person that she paints, and they're working hard together. So I really like that. Now there are 4 passengers in this boat, besides Frances and Edward Hopkins. There's another visitor, Edward Watkins from England, and a governor of Rupert's Land, Alexander de la Grant. So they're out for a tourist ride. Okay. There you go. Take a look at, there's that nice cross stroke of some kind. There are the passengers. This fellow also is darker complexioned, and they have to think about that time was the time of the Underground Railroad. So there would have been African-American people coming up north and possibly finding jobs as voyageurs. So, and Frances Anne signed at the bottom. Okay.
Lee, if I might,
Yes.
it's important because people will see the date of the painting, but the event that is the subject of the painting took place in 1863. So right in the middle of the American Civil War.
Boom. Thank you. See, you know what, when Leah and I were going through this and preparing it, we went down many, many rabbit holes and seeing where did Frances Anne live? Where is her place? Where is that place on St. Dominic Street? And what's happening in the States at the same time? Thank you.
Mhm.
And so this is a picture of, there's a steamship going down the rapids. There must have been a route there somewhere that they could use. And the middle picture, the big one, is what Lachine Rapids look like today. And you can still run those rapids, but in jet boats. So this is not for the faint of heart. A bit of excitement. Okay, the next picture, this is the Red River expedition at Kakabeka Falls that she painted actually in 1877. But remember her first trip long before then, when she was on the first long trip with her husband, and they went to Fort William, and from there they were on voyageur canoes going up the river to follow this route and up to Kakabeka Falls, which are magnificent.
Mhm.
Now, this is commissioned picture, commissioned by General Garnet. I can never say his last name. Wolseley. Anyway, that guy that led the expedition with 1,000 men from Ottawa, Montreal area, Kingston area, out to Manitoba to counter the Louisville Rebellion. So a piece of history here, and you can see the guys are in lots of York boats, though I think that a lot of that expedition would have been done with transferring people by steamboat and train, etc. 1,000 people is a lot of people to move. And you'll notice there's only one canoe in there. Frances Anne, how come there's only one canoe and the rest are York boats? Do we know?
I'm so sorry. Yes, I'm sorry. I don't know, but I was told to get out of the way quite quickly.
Okay, Mary Ellen, do we know why there's only one canoe and a bunch of York boats?
Well, that's because the canoe holds the leader of the expedition, Garnet Wolseley, and he preferred to travel by canoe. It's a considerably more comfortable trip.
Okay. I like a canoe better. Yep, so you can see these guys are going up and over the Portage Trail, and they're building a corduroy road, which is a bunch of logs laid across, horizontally across and going up. So in some places in Manitoba, those are still there. They're called ladders, and if you're going up and over a height of land, you put your boat on the rollers and you just push them along. And when I traveled through north central Manitoba, they had those there, and the guys going from one community to the next would push their motorboats up. Kids staying in the motorboats, they'd get and the other guys would be hauling and pushing the motorboat up, and at the top of the hill, then they just aim just exactly right and let the motorboat slide down into the water. It was exciting. Anyway, so a lot of things that are the same. And there's a curator at one of the museums who said, oh, Frances Anne
Yes, it was the
took liberty.
Art Gallery of Ontario. I rolled in my grave.
How come?
She said that I had taken great liberties painting Kakabeka Falls because any one of us, well, you as canoeists, know that Kakabeka Falls is a very tall falls. So she said that I had misrepresented the falls. But as we know, from Uncle Richard, I did things very carefully. And so Dot and Ms. Benson looked at Google Earth and all sorts of things and determined that the falls she painted were the upper falls. The rocks are in the exact correct position. Everything Dot or Madame, I'm so sorry, that I did was very accurate.
There you go. So there's the real Kakabeka Falls, so the bigger ones that are the tourist site, and the other ones are up there. Second ones.
We were just in the way and told to just be out of the way for that long portage up the big falls. So we were stationed at the small ones. So that's what I was allowed to paint, not the big ones. I'd be in the way.
There you go. Okay, so here's a photo of the lower falls, and they really are spectacular. Okay, going on, aha. This is a reminder that at the time, Canada was having railroads installed or built. There were steamboats all along the routes, especially along the big lakes, along the big rivers, up the Ottawa, up the St. Lawrence, and fashion was changing. So instead of the call for beaver to make those fancy beaver hats, the new fashion is silk hats. And so the fur trade is waning. The other thing that's happening is in 1870, Hudson Bay Company sold Rupert's Land to Canada. I'm looking up to see how much, I don't remember. Anyway, so Hudson Bay Company and Canada are looking more towards having settlers come in, and they want to create a country. So they need communities and they need people to settle the land. Good news for many people like my grandparents. It came in the mid 1870s in that migration wave. And maybe not so good news for First Nations people, but that's what was happening at that time. So Frances Anne has arrived and has documented like the fading glory days of the fur trade. No, there's Rupert's Land. It's a huge piece of land. And here are some other paintings. I'm just going to show them. If you've paddled on the French River, you know this spot.
Mm.
And the French River has all those gorgeous granite rocks. This is a camp at night on Lake Superior. This is actually just east of Fort William, actually, which is Thunder Bay, is what we know it at a time. And some camp scene on the Ottawa River. There's a place east of Ottawa towards Montreal that really looks like this, where there are channels going through the rivers. Now, this is my friend Lee Benson's favorite. You want to tell them why?
If you look carefully, those are very large trees. Much of Algonquin Park was logged out by 1860s. So she was seeing what was once the primeval forest that was being cut down rapidly to send timber to England.
Yep. And these two guys are taking a break. I don't know where everybody else is. This one is really a very different approach, and I'm not sure where this is located because I don't recognize those cliffs. So it could be something that she's imagined, but again, the camp is bang on in terms of the tents and that kind of thing. Okay, and so what I want to do is finish here. And I can show you some other pictures and we'll just go through them quickly, but this is my last presentation slide. And in 1988, we had a special stamp for Frances Anne Hopkins, a homage to a Canadian artist. because she did paintings of a very bygone era and documented history, but absolutely stunning pieces of work. What a fabulous artist in her own right. And interesting because when she was painting in Canada, she was doing Canadian subjects. And then she would go home to London and finish and paint them there. And she could sell them there. And her canoes in a fog, she sold the copying rights to a printer shop. And so a lot of her paintings were made into prints. So very famous in England, especially, and in the European areas, but not so interested, not so much response from people in Canada. She did have a exhibition in Canada in the 1870s, I think. Yep. Not much response, but gangbusters when she was over in England. So how interesting. An artist from England who paints Canadian stuff, who sells stuff in England. And it's not a big deal in Canada, it's a huge deal in England. But then, as time went on, she was less and less known. But now we claim her to be a Canadian artist and our Canadian topics. And especially for canoeists, it's a beautiful thing. Frances Anne, would you like to add anything, comments to that?
Well, I will. Now, this was after I passed away, but the reason I wasn't even known as an artist in Canada was because in 1921, a publisher who had lived in Toronto was in New York and saw 4 of my paintings on sale in a gallery. He decided that they were very important to Canada and Canada's history, so he purchased them and he wanted to give them to some department in Canada, but he chose the National Archives. So I became known as someone who had recorded history accurately and could be referred to, the paintings could be referred to as an historical record, but I wasn't known as an artist in Canada. So in this stamp in 1988, I was finally recognized too as an artist. And Mary Ellen, if you'd like to add anything to that, that would be wonderful.
I can't think of anything to add except to say thank you to you both. You've put together a wonderful presentation.
That's high praise. Thank you, Mary Ellen. It's because of you that we have this.
And your book.
The other thing that goes along with this, thank you, Mary Ellen, is I'm going to organize a day trip to Montreal in the spring when the voyageur, when the Fur Trade Museum is open, and do a Frances Anne tour to see the areas where she lived and to visit the museum, of course, have a little paddle around that area. We're not going to run the rapids though. and then up to Montreal to visit the cemetery there, because it's not just her children who are there, but I can take some flowers and leave them on her behalf. But there's also the gravesite for David Thompson and his wife Charlotte, the most astounding map maker in history. So I'm going to be going there. If anybody's interested, let me know. Okay. So at the same time, we're going to go through, it's 8:30. So I will finish up with the last few slides. Frances Anne Hopkins contemporaries, Cornelius Krieghoff, Paul Kane. Oh, now I can't see his name. Arthur Hemming. Maybe a little bit later than her, but the same, the topics are the same. Here's a print by W.H. Bartlett, Going Up a Rapid. Mary Millicent Chaplin, Alice Killally. Notice a lot of her stuff is really quite similar. It's beautiful. And of course, this is a familiar one from out east. And this one, because I've paddled the Churchill River in Labrador, I have a real sense of this area. And these guys are trappers, and they look tired because they have just hauled up over a mountain. These guys were astounding travelers and trappers, extremely capable. And here's a different viewpoint. This is the Prince of Wales visits Ottawa. And they had a lumberman regattas. And then Frederick Remington. It's a bit later, but the topic is still the same. But look how differently his approach is to this subject matter. Okay, with that, we're going to go back to Frances Anne. Okay, with that, Mark, we are done. And if people have questions, it's only 8:30, so I've done well.
Well, thank you very much. Well, I was going to say both of you, but both of you plus Mary Ellen, because you were as much a part of the team as both Dot and Lee. So thank you all. Anybody who wants to has a question or a comment, feel free to toss it in the chat or to raise a virtual hand. And if you can't figure out either of those, turn on your camera and flash your hand in front of the camera. But I'll start with a couple of comments that have been in the chat for a little bit. The painting of the canoes going through the fog, was that related to the death of her child?
Oh, that's a question for Mary Ellen. Are you still there?
I'm still there.
Yay.
I appreciate that comment because I've never thought of it that way.
Neil, I think it was very insightful.
Into something.
Because it almost says that while we almost know the present, and even the present is foggy, the future is really unknown. The boats are so indistinct in the future, and her future had changed so much from what she thought was her dream.
Oh, yeah. Beautiful.
Losing your children. It's a nice comment, Neil.
Thank you.
Tom, you have a virtual hand up.
Yeah, question. Well, first of all, great presentation, very entertaining and informative. So well done by I think all four of you had a hand in that. I guess one question I'm intrigued about is how did she travel in lavish comfort? Obviously, she wasn't paddling. Did she have like china, tea, sherry, feather beds, or was she sleeping under the canoe? Or how much is known about how much she was coddled? She and her husband. Let's be clear; they're probably both in the same position. Any thoughts or conjectures about that?
Mary Ellen, in your book, I think you hit upon some really important things. I mean, this is a woman who grew up in middle class, so she wasn't used to being the only woman with a whole lot of men. She had to work out how to do her business in a discreet way. There were no comfort stops along the way. It was just paddle all the time. And so those things would be challenging. And Mary Ellen, I really liked what you were saying about her being a young woman amongst all of these men, that she was always very careful to make sure there was a woman with a man in her paintings so that it was all proper. But she was a young woman and her husband was much older, and I think she was probably quite honestly attracted to a lot of these people. So she saw them as individuals because she probably studied them a bit as well.
Mary Ellen, can you respond to that?
Well, in terms of the luxuries, her husband's position was not as high as was sometimes assumed. So he really never rose higher than chief actor. At one point, he's in charge, and put that in quotes, in charge of the office in Montreal, but he never really is governor or chief or any higher than a chief actor, which means that no, they probably didn't bring lots of, well, let's say feather beds would be out. There's no room in the canoe anyway. They usually cut pine boughs, preferably balsam. I know balsam isn't really a pine, but the balsam
I'll go with that.
are on the floor of the tent, and then throw some, maybe a couple of woolen blankets over that. They did serve tea. They would have had a teapot. One of the paintings shows a good bit of the equipment that was common there. No,
This one.
no,
Oh.
the one before it or ahead of it.
There.
Right.
So you can see that the hamper is wooden. It's obviously British. It's not Native American equipment. But I wouldn't expect anything very lavish, just to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but that's a very good question, because she would be treated very well by the team.
Oh yeah.
And taken care of, lifted out of the canoe onto the shore when she's there, onto the portage trail, and maybe even, this is from your book, Mary Ellen, maybe even carried across the trail, because it was simpler for them. And she would have, she had these wonderful suggestions from another friend about the same age situation as she, and so she was told to get moccasins and not to wear fancy shoes, and simpler clothes, things that are easier to travel in. I'm going to go back to, let's see, where is the one there? This one. This guy is leaning over the edge of the canoe, and he's going to pick up a water lily. And actually, I think she's got one on her lap as well. So there's this sort of mix of chivalry and gallantry, kindness in the middle of, because these guys would not be amongst the gentlemen in society, but they would, they treated her well in that.
Oh yes.
Yeah. So these two would have had a tent to sleep in, and the rest of the guys would be underneath the canoes.
So you don't think it was her sleeping in under the canoe?
I don't think so.
Probably.
Although I'm thinking with her verve, if she'd had a chance, and if she was now, I think she would do that. I think she would be out and about.
And I
That's it.
think
So
too,
I've got another comment from the chat that'll amuse you or interest you, from Sue. Thank you so much for putting together and making her feel welcome. She has a large print of shooting the rapids over her living room sofa.
Ooh.
This presentation helps appreciate it even more. I soaked in every bit of your presentation. It makes me feel I want to move where I could battle with you all.
Oh.
Yes.
thank you, Sue.
All in favor.
Yeah.
No, that's good.
A question from the chat. Where does one get hold of Mary Ellen's book?
Oh, yes. Mary Ellen, can you talk to that?
You go online to a company called Jack Pine Books. And if you just put that in your search engine, it should take you right to Frances Anne.
So Mary Ellen, you have to put or tell us the name. I'm going to type it in the chat But tell us the name of the book.
Frances Anne Hopkins.
Hudson Bay Company
Hudson-
Wife, Voyageurs Artists.
Yes.
Let's see if I can put it in there.
And just while you're typing it in, Dot, I like thinking with that painting that Frances Anne is going to be given that flower because they like her. And I think she likes the people she's with because she painted them as individuals.
Oh, yes.
And there are people from all different walks of life and nationalities. And I think she's a wonderful, her paintings are a wonderful metaphor for what could be instead of what is right now. With all the disagreement and dissent in the world, she has shown unity. Mind you, a little bit of a class difference there, but really all the people are working together as a team.
Yeah.
No Frances
So-
Anne.
Thanks to Paul Arsenault for posting a link to Jack Pine books in the
Oh.
chat.
Mhm.
Question. Did any of those canoes tip with their passengers aboard?
At some point they would have, because there are a lot of voyageurs who drowned. They didn't know how to swim. At least the ones from Europe were not swimmers. And so bad luck if they tipped. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that can be found at the bottom of rapids. So along the French River, there are people who go snorkeling to look for stuff there.
And
was not-
sometimes, oh, sorry, Doc.
No, go ahead.
Sometimes the useless tourists were left in the boat while people lined the canoes up the rapids. So if anything was going to fall in, it might as well be the useless stuff rather than the expensive cargo.
Here you go. Oh my God.
Beautiful.
Don't wear a dress. Oh my God.
And
Anyway,
then, yeah, a reminder from Paul is they didn't have such thing as a PFD either.
no, they did not.
For those who are interested, right after Paul's post with the link to Jack Pine books, Dot has posted the name of the book. So Frances Anne Hopkins, Hudson's Bay Company Wife, Voyageurs, Artist, by Mary Ellen Weller.
Yep.
There are so many laudatory comments in chat that we don't have time to read them all. But suffice to say, the written comments are all saying, "Weehaw."
Yay.
Hey, thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I
Thank you.
enjoyed it. And great big huge thank you and so much delight, Mary Ellen, that you could join us. And of course, to the spirit of Frances Anne.
Yes, thank you, Mary Ellen. Thank you, Dot.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I'm looking forward to that